When you think about Northwest Michigan, you normally think of great weekend getaway destinations like Traverse City, Petoskey, Charlevoix, Boyne Mountain, Sleeping Bear Dunes, and a lot of beautiful Lake Michigan coastline. For many years, it was not a place known for big mature whitetails. Sandy soils, hard winters, and extremely high hunting pressure with lots of public land made this part of Michigan mostly a recreational hunting area. But that started to change after 2013 when APR's antler point restrictions were put into place. Since then, legal bucks had to have at least 3 points on one side in what is known as the Northwest 13 counties. Leelanau County had already been under APRs for about 10 years by then, with great results. What used to be the annual spike and 4-point area of Michigan has now become an area where bucks have a much better chance at growing to maturity. If you check the photos on the MichiganBuckPoll.com website, you'll see that even now public land is producing some really nice mature bucks. I'm seeing the same trend with landowners in those counties as I visit properties to create a habitat plan with hunting strategy. Last month, a new landowner in Charlevoix County contacted me to do just that. He picked up a beautiful 80-acre piece this past spring and wanted me to take a look at it before he has a logger come in to start removing trees for food plots and bedding areas. It's always good to have a plan in place first to fit all the pieces together so that the property can be hunted with as little pressure as possible to the deer. The landowner has already started working on the property and has even started his own YouTube channel called the Heavenly Game Farm to show the progress. I'll leave a link in the description below to his YouTube channel. When I arrived, he went over what he had already done, what he wanted to do, the 40 acres his daughter and son-in-law bought next to him, who his neighbors are, and where public land touches his property, and so on. Then, before we headed out to check out the property, I fired up the onX app to track the trails and mark locations for stands, food plots, bedding areas, and barricades, and so on. He took me down the main trail on the west side along the swamp. He said earlier in the spring there was fall deer sign that they were crossing the two-track in and out of the thick swamp. On his side of the trail was mostly softwood trees and a lot of ironwood. Only a couple red oaks on the property that he's going to protect with his life. Once we got to the main food plot, he explained that he had begun the process of improving the poor sandy soil with Grant Wood's release method, which used to be called the buffalo system. He's going to completely go no-till and bought a drill this past summer so he can plant and crimp 2 cycles of soil-building green manure. He already knew what I thought of his big exposed box blinds, and his plan is to plant screening around it or move it back into the cover. From there, he took me to a big southern-facing slope where he had already begun clearing out trees with a small excavator and skid steer for a destination food plot. I love that this is on higher ground and centrally located on the property. Deer can bed below and west of the food, while hunter access will be from the northeast, especially since his most common wind in October and November is from the southwest. Those are just a few of the highlights on the property tour that day. What I want to do now is jump into the habitat plan I drew up for him so he can move forward with confidence that his efforts won't hurt his ability to hunt the property effectively. So if we look at a 10,000-foot overview of this property, you'll notice that we're in a typical northern Michigan wilderness setting. There's absolutely no ag around except for a little cornfield down here to the southwest about a mile away. Other than that, it is just big woods, not a lot of mass trees. Food in this area is really scarce, and so obviously that means that the more food that my client can put on his property, the more that his property is going to have something that no one else has. Because if you look around, and I looked at a couple other mapping sites, and there's really no visible big food plots anywhere. A lot of these other fields, I asked the client, these are mostly just hay, CRP, nothing like soybeans or corn or anything like that. Maybe an alfalfa field here and there, but alfalfa is not that palatable when it gets into October and November, especially in northern Michigan where we get early freezes. So this is an area where he can really dominate the deer activity if he can put more and more food on the property. If he's in an agricultural area where he's got corn and soybeans everywhere, well, now he doesn't need the food as much as he's going to need the cover because, that's probably what deer are going to lack in that situation. Now here's a closer view from onX Maps, and it shows the public land around this whole area. This thick, nasty swamp is all public land. You've got a few landowners in here, but my client's property is this 80 right here. This is his daughter and son-in-law's 40 over here to the northeast. And you can see we got this little cornfield here about a mile away, and then we've got his little food plot here and this little one right there. So basically that's about the only food that I see in the area. This right down here might be a little food plot, but I mean, this is barely an acre in size, so it's not really going to be that big of a draw. You know, the goal that I'm going to try and push for my client is that he get about 5 acres of food on this 80 acres. Now, I know there's talk about, you know, you got to be at 10%, especially if you're in a wilderness setting, but that's if you don't have a lot of other browse in your woods. But my client plans on cutting his woods. He's going to have a lot of food and browse and forbs growing in his woods within a couple of years by letting the sunlight in and taking out that big closed canopy. Because right now his property is nothing but just leaves on the ground and very little understory. So there's almost no food on his property other than the little bit of food he has now. So he's going to absolutely have the buffet in the area once he gets the loggers in there. And he's already got the bedding all the way around his property. I mean, this all the way to the south here is just thick, nasty swamp where deer can just be left alone. They're not going to be bothered in this stuff. So it's not like there's a neighbor to the west of him, you know, mucking things up with bad scent control and, you know, running ATVs down his west property line, right? Because most of the winds in this area in October, November, and December are from the southwest. Surprisingly, there's very few winds coming out of the east, and that's really not the case in most areas. You'll be surprised how many easterly winds a lot of properties get, but not in this particular case. Always got to take that into consideration when setting up tree stands and blinds for a dominant wind. There are windrows sites out there online that you can check in your area. Generally, every airport has a data center where they record the wind directions for like the last 50 years. And so this one right here is not too far away from my client's property, but it's closer to the lakeshore. And you can see this place gets a lot of northeast winds. Very strange, right? I mean, and it's not very far from my client's property. I'd say maybe, 30 minutes tops, really. So, you know, very few southwest winds compared to northeast winds. And that's in October, ever since 2002. So, you know, that's almost 20 years of data. This is what normally happens in the month of October. November, he gets a lot more southwest winds. He gets more westerly winds, but still quite a few northeast winds. And then December's pretty much like November. So if we look at one more, this one's going to be 45 minutes north of him, and he's getting, this is closer to the Mackinac Bridge. This is a lot of northwest winds and quite a few southeast winds. So you can see not a lot of southwest winds, not a lot of east or northeast winds. So really it's a good website to go to check to see what dominant winds are in your area during the months of October, November, and December. And it's surprising sometimes how that will change from month to month. Now, if we go back to the OnX view with the topo lines on it, you'll see that, you know, this property has got a lot of topography, right? I mean, we're up to 900 feet here, and, it drops down to like 800 feet by the road. So from the road here where they can access this corner, you know, it's a good 100 feet going up to this peak here and then back down again. So, you know, access is going to be really, really hard from the east side here. But what I like to do to get a real good feel on the topography on a property is I'll go to a different website, and this is on a USGS website, and on this view it really shows the topography with the shadows much better. It even adds the topo lines on it. So, you know, right here we've got 920 feet at the top, and you can see by how dark it is as to how fast it drops off. And this is right here where that property corner is, and to go right up here you can see it's pretty steep. So access is going to be almost impossible coming in from this way. It's going to be much easier, which I'll show you on the habitat plan, for them to come in from the north. The other thing I like about this view is that if you look real close, you can see some of the trails that are going through the property. Now, these images are taken right through the leaf cover. You can see these trails going right through the property. Here's the one that comes right down along the swamp edge here that we went down. It takes us all the way to the food plot. Now, what's real interesting is you see that we've got, kind of a rough texture throughout the property here. But when you get to right this spot here, you can see it's smooth, and that's because this is where his existing food plot is. So you don't have all the differences in the tree heights to make for a rough surface. Now, this USGS site also has some different layers that you can use, and you can plug in some different colors, and it really kind of adds another dimension to it as far as the topography of the property. And you know, they also overlay all the topo lines, so it really gives you a good idea as to how the property is laid out. And obviously you can easily see the swamp edge, so it really helps you to understand, you know, where you can put bedding areas and where you can put food plots and where the ridges are, where you might travel or the deer are going to travel. So you'll notice here we've got the road coming in up the east side, and then the driveway into the property is the bold orange line right here. It takes us all the way back to the house. Now his daughter and son-in-law, you know, their 40 acres is this corner here, and they have already logged this area off right here, and they're going to put in a barn dominium over here in this area. And this is just going to be such a beautiful setting for those guys. My client really wasn't too concerned about doing any habitat improvements over here, only because there's going to be a lot of activity here around their homestead. Then we got this really high hill, which is really tough to hunt, and they were going to probably use this more of a recreational type piece, and then all the deer activity would be over here on the 80. This is the food plot right here that he was working on when I was there. This is where he had a mini excavator and a skid steer that he was taking down trees. Now it's not level, but it is a soft slope that goes down to the southwest. And so the plan is to put a blind right up here on the northeast corner, and then just look down toward the southwest. And that, as we saw from the windrows, is the wind's going to be in his face as he's sitting in that box blind most of the time.
I mean, Randy, look at that. I don't care how it hunts. Just look how pretty it is.
Yeah.
You know?
That's awesome.
And so, you know, the plan will be for the logger to come in here and thin this out even more, get rid of most of it, unless you tell me otherwise. Even some of this big stuff that's on the edge up here. So when you're sitting up there in that stand, think about it.
Well, when the leaves are down,
It's going to be panoramic, just gorgeous.
that view is going to be amazing with the leaves down.
It looks right over top of the river bottom.
Oh,
you
man.
know, over into the farmland across there.
Yeah.
You know,
Over
so-
top of all that swamp,
Yeah.
huh?
So I mean, just for a minute here, we're not thinking about habitat management. We're just literally thinking about, yeah, this is going to be pretty.
Now, the other reason I really like the location of this food plot is because just down the hill and to the west, there's some terraces here in which he can do a lot of hinge cutting. So these yellow areas here are areas in which he can put hinge cut bedding. So whether that's like 40 yards long by 20 yards wide or 30 yards oval, you know, he can put in several in here that can hold a lot of deer. Now, the does are probably going to bed here close to the food. The bucks are going to be out here, probably out in the swamp, away from the food. We've got more doe bedding areas that he can put on the property, but he's got this huge swamp out here that is going to be able to hold a lot of mature bucks that are trying to get away from the Orange Army, especially during firearm season. And, you know, he's got a great recipe here to hold bucks to get them to graduate to the next age class, right? And we call that the POLTS, P-O-L-T-S. That means possibility of long-term survival. These bucks in this area actually have a place that they can go and have a good chance on getting through gun season. And so that just gives this property a lot of potential to see those mature bucks. If he can hold these bucks in this area and keep those bucks off his neighbors by having enough food here, attracting enough girls, providing a lot of cover, he's bound to have more bucks that are going to hang around, stay off the neighbors, and graduate to the next age class. Now, these little brown dots out here, these are actually suggested locations where he can put in some individual buck beds. Now, this is something I learned from a guy named Jake Blow out in Minnesota. And what he did is he went out into a swamp that had some standing water, but he would find some of these high spots and he would load them up with wheelbarrows of wood chips. And so what it would do is just create a little bit more of a dry spot, and it will insulate that ground a little bit for those deer because they don't want to lay in water. And I thought that was just a great idea, especially for this client, because he and his son-in-law bought a forestry mulcher a couple of years ago. And, you know, he's out doing a lot of mulching, creating a lot of wood chips, you know, and then with all the lumbering and timbering that they're going to be doing on this property, and then cleaning up with that forestry mulcher, they're going to produce so many wood chips that my client's going to have an endless amount of wood chips to put out here in the swamp just to create buck beds on a high spot. You'll just have to check with the DNR in your state to make sure that that's something that you're allowed to do. And you can see here, we've got kind of a rough texture on the imagery, where down here it doesn't look as rough, right? And so what that's telling me is that there's bigger trees here, which means that the swamp is not as wet. So it's probably a little bit drier ground here than it is down in these areas. You get a little bit closer to the trail, and then we've got more of that texture again. So probably bigger trees here in the swamp. Now, this landowner doesn't have to go very far out into the swamp. I mean, just as long as he's out here far enough away from this main access trail that comes down to the southern end of the property, that's really all he needs. I mean, it is so thick out here that these bucks don't need to go very far out into that swamp. And it's absolutely impenetrable from the other side. So, being this is all public land over here, he's never going to have to worry about anybody from public land coming in from the west, coming up on these bucks from the backside. And the bucks aren't going to have to worry about it either. So he's got a great situation here where he can feed deer, he can house deer, and really start to develop a mature age class. Now, getting back to this food plot real quick, one thing I wanted to point out was we got these brown lines that are in this food plot. And really what this is these are debris piles that the landowner, he can pile up. All those trees that he was taking down, he can pile up in brush piles and just make sight barriers in this food plot. So basically what it does is it makes this food plot feel a little bit smaller to these deer. They don't feel like they're standing out in a big football field, right? So deer over here can't see deer over here. They can't see deer over here. And it just gives a little bit more of an intimate feel to these deer. And every single one of these sight barriers is pointing right at the blind. So if the landowner is in the blind, he can see on both sides of each of these barriers. So really it's not restricting much of his view as much as it is the deer from seeing each other. And it was kind of funny when I was there because the landowner was wondering whether or not, that was a good idea. He was wondering if it was going to look really ugly.
It ain't going to be pretty with the piles.
Pretty as for people.
There you go. Exactly. What were we saying a minute ago about how this was going to be that picture postcard view of northern Michigan? I know. Think habitat, Keith. Don't think pretty. Pretty is for people.
So just a couple of little things I wanted to point out on this plan, and this is something I do for all my clients, and that is I color code my stands between early season and rut stands. So all the orange stars that you see are basically based on the food, and so these would be early season stands that are easy to get into and out of without much impact on the property because they're close to trails or they're on the edges of food plots, tucked in the cover or screened well. But then the red stands are generally off the food plots where the bucks are cruising through and around food plots, especially in high hunting pressured areas. And those are to be hunted basically that last week of October and then the first 3 weeks of November during the rut. So one thing we had to do was trying to create a little bit more predictability as far as hunting goes on this property. It's great that we got more food and it's great that we got a lot of stands, but if the deer can just wander through this wilderness setting anywhere, it's still not going to lend to very good predictable deer movement. So you'll notice here I got these long yellow lines with the black marks through it, and these are hinge cut barriers. So basically it's just a matter of coming in here with a chainsaw and laying a bunch of trees down in a straight row. You don't want deer to get through here. So what that does is it restricts their ability to get in and out of the property, and then place a tree stand on one end of the opening. So the openings that you see here between these two barricades, I like to make them as long as what the landowner is comfortable in shooting his bow. So if his max range on a bow is say 35 yards, then we'll leave this opening at about 30 to 35 yards so that he can cover the whole distance through that opening whenever a deer walks through here. So the way I like to do that is I find the perfect tree. I like to pick conifers so that the landowner can hide in a conifer really well. And then from that tree, going back, I'll create a barrier so the deer can't sneak behind the hunter. And then in front of the tree, we'll leave that opening of 30 to 35 yards before we start another barricade. So that forces the deer to go through here. And because it's 30 to 35 yards wide, the deer doesn't feel as though he's being pinched. Like if it's, a gateway of 10 yards or 5 yards, right? So mature bucks are going to go through a wide one like that. They don't even realize they're being pinched, but yet the client can cover that whole distance with his bow. And you can see that we've got several of those. So instead of deer randomly being able to come in and out of this property, and it's going to be like playing whack-a-mole, right? Where are they going to be coming through today? Well, now you've only got a few places where they can come in and out of that big swamp, up into the property, up into the high ground, and coming into this food. So after the landowner gets all his food plots installed on his plan here, he's going to have just over 5 acres or so. And this is really going to help differentiate his property from everyone else in the area. He's going to have his western swamp nearby that can hold all the mature bucks that might want to access the food and the bedding. And even though it would be nice to maybe have a little bit higher percentage of food on the property, there's a fine line there where do you have the ability to even put it on the property and still be able to hunt it? So in a closed canopy wilderness setting like this in northern Michigan, it really is about letting the sunshine in and differentiating your property from everybody else. So if you've been thinking about getting a habitat plan and hunting strategy laid out for your property, I am booking appointments for 2022. The calendar is already starting to fill up for this December. I'm probably only going to do about 60 to 65 properties this year because I am going to be doing a lot of hinge cutting for various clients as well. So if you want to start the process on taking your property to the next level, I've left all my contact information in the description box below this video. Feel free to give me a call, text, or email. And I even have a free 45-minute property review that we can do via a Zoom call if that's what you want to do first. But anyway, hopefully you got something out of this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you on the next video.